There are people throughout the world that have interesting stories to tell. Stories of heroism, acts of kindness, near-death experiences, successes, and failures. You usually hear of these stories from people that live in another state or country. But what about the stories from within your own community? Everyone has a story to tell. And by everyone, we mean your neighbor, your coworker, the person behind you at church, people you interact with on a daily basis, or maybe even you.
Welcome to the DTB Podcast, presented by the Bless Your Heart Nonprofit Corporation. I'm Brennan Mathern, and I'll be your host as we speak to some of the most interesting people in Bayou Lafourche. At the start of this season, we spoke to administrators of Lady of the Sea General Hospital, a little about their history, but mostly about Hurricane Ida and the future of the hospital. So in that vein, for this show, we head up the bayou to highlight a local doctor who's also from our area. Dr. Lindsay Lasseigne is a neurosurgeon with the Thibodaux Regional Health System, and we're so happy she's here joining us today. Dr. Lasseigne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to talk with you.
We're happy to have you. So like we do with every guest, we want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your family. Who's your mom and dad, where you're from, where you went to school? All of your schools, by the way.
Sure. Well, my name is Lindsay. I was formerly Lindsay Mayet. I grew up in Lockport, Louisiana. Ultimately married a Thibodaux boy from up north, so my last name now is Lasseigne. But yeah, I grew up in Lockport. My mother is from Lockport, so is my dad. They're both natives to Lafourche Parish. My dad is Joe Paul Mayet, M-A-Y-E-T. He grew up in Lockport. His family came from cattle farming, and my mother was Stephanie Boyd Mayet, and her family came from the boat business. So grew up in small old Lockport. I have one sister. Her name is Lauren. We went to Central Lafourche, and I really never wanted to leave Lafourche Parish, so ended up at Nichols, where I did my undergrad, which I loved. I loved my time at Nichols. I always said, if I could go to med school there, I would have never left. So after there, unfortunately, did have to leave to do some specialty education and training. And so I stayed in Louisiana for most of it, though. I did LSU, New Orleans for medical school. And I also was thankful enough to stay there for residency, which I did a neurosurgery residency. That's a 7-year residency. But 1 year I did leave. I left and went to Ohio to Cleveland for fellowship, and I did that in neurocritical care up in Ohio. My husband, Jeff, and we've been married for, I keep forgetting, I think it's going to be 14 years this year. Yep, 14 years.
We won't tell him you said that.
Well, as long as he remembers. It's okay if I forget. This June, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be celebrating our 14th wedding anniversary. He's been with me through all of that training. We met when I was a second-year college student at Nichols, so he's been along for the whole ride. We have 2 babies. We have Georgia Grace, or Gigi. She is 2. Quite a spirited young lady, I tell you. She is funny. And then our little boy, Gentry. I call him my little angel. He is 1 year old. He just turned 1.
Wow, so back to back.
Yeah. I thought the second one was a gallbladder attack, but surprise, it's a baby.
Now, when you mention your family, some people, we have to point this out, some people may know you better from Instagram, Medically Blonde. It's clear on your Instagram that you promote positivity, which I love because that's something my wife and I love doing. I have to use social media for work. I'm literally a social media administrator, so I know firsthand all the negativity that's on social media, and it's just awesome to see anyone local or anyone period using popularity on social media for positivity. So thank you for that. But can you talk a little bit? Just mention your Instagram and where does the name Medically Blonde come from?
Yes. Oh, I'm happy to do it. So really, I spend most of my time working and very scientific, but I love being creative. I love photography. I love fashion. I love food. So that really is kind of a little bit personal indulgent for me just because it allows me to be creative. But also the real reason I do it is a lot of young women over the years have reached out to me and say, oh, it's good to see a woman also do a surgical career, also have children, also have a balanced life, also travel. And so because there's so much feedback from young women that they find it positive and they find it inspiring, I say, well, okay, I guess I'll keep doing it. And it really is my way of showing other women in particular that they can do it all and they don't have to be masculine to do something like what I do for a living. They can be themselves and they can be feminine, and just to try to show some light that you can still be a woman and have all these wonderful career and professional goals as well.
And it seems like we're on the same wavelength of my social media accounts exist to highlight my gorgeous children. Like that seems like what yours is for too.
You'll see a big difference. 2 years ago, it went from a whole lot of medical things about how to study for a test to check out my cute kids and how funny they are. But, it's just what inspires me. And, I don't have any certain objective with the Instagram. It's just my way to be creative and also try to network with other young women in particular. But, I have male followers as well. It's nothing that, I don't gear towards them. But in particular, I think a lot of women seem to relate with it.
It's interesting you brought up networking with social media, which is what I use Twitter a lot for, and it has bbeen invaluable. Just reaching out to people, especially after hurricanes. We'll get a little bit into that in a little while. But you mentioned previously that you never wanted to leave, and you're back now. But before we get into what you're doing now in Thibodaux with Thibodaux Regional, a lot of high school students want to become doctors or nurses, and they have the idea of returning home after school, but they never get the chance, or they find a husband or a wife and they stay away. How did you keep that dream alive to be able to be lured back to the Bayou?
It was truly never an option that I would practice anywhere else. I truly love Bayou Lafourche. The reason I have success and have achieved what I have is because of the teachers and the support system and the mentors that are here in Bayou Lafourche. And so because of that, I had success in my education and have this career that I feel so privileged that it was never an option for me to not use these tools back home to serve the population here. It was truly never something that I would have done anything differently. So it was easy. No one really had to lure me. Of course, I tried to play a little hard to get when I was in the interview process to make sure that they knew that, I had value and I knew that. But at the same time, it was clear I wanted to come home. This is a unique population to treat from a medical perspective. Thibodaux in general, we have world-class medical care that you will find in large cities, but it's right here in our tiny little home of Lafourche Parish. And so not only as a worker of the Thibodaux health system, but as a consumer, my parents go there for care, my children and I go there for care. I'm really impressed with the quality of care that we can give here, and it's my goal that patients suffering with neurosurgical problems don't have to travel far to get care. We know that you get best care close to home. When you're sick, you want to be in your own bed. Well, it's even, more magnified when you have something serious going on. So if we can give people that best quality care, but they don't have to leave for it, that's the ideal. And so I guess all of that, my love of the people here, my love of, my story of how I got here and how thankful I am, I knew I wanted to come back.
Man, and you mentioned all of the first-class facilities there, and especially with the opening of all their new sports complexes. I'm looking at our producer, Greg Stock, needs to be on our list of future guests as well to talk about Thibodaux Regional. But Lindsay, you got there in 2021. Let's talk about your position. First of all, what is a neurosurgeon? Because it sounds very important. And what is the difference between a neurosurgeon per se and a neurologist? Great
question. So it is actually very different. And I get all the time, people are like, oh, we're so proud of you, you're a neurologist, or, oh, I need to come see you about my seizures, and it really is very different. So it's a great opportunity for me to address that. And I take that for granted because, I work in healthcare, but it's so different. So neurology, which is not what I do a little bit of it, I guess, is disorders of the human nervous system. So that's, brain, spine, neuromuscular system. But neurosurgery is specifically surgical management, okay? We do in neurosurgery, I have a partner, Dr. Awasthi and I, we're the two neurosurgeons, really the only ones, and not just Lafourche Parish, but the only region, throughout the region. We do surgical management of brain and spine conditions. So most of our practice is management of spine conditions, so specifically spine surgery. We do cervical, which is the neck, thoracic, and lumbar spine surgery, whether that's decompression, fusion, trauma, fractures, tumors. Most of it is arthritic and degenerative over years. That is the bulk of our practice because that's the most common pathology that affects the human nervous system from a surgeon's perspective. But for the cranial stuff, the brain stuff, we also take care of brain tumors and head bleeds, stroke, trauma, car accidents, pretty much any condition that you would have pressure, blood, or a tumor in the brain. So that's the bulk of our practice. We do not go through neurology to get to surgery. It's just 7 years after medical school of just surgical management of brain and spine conditions.
Well, early when we started the show, we mentioned that we had on at the beginning of the season people from some of the administrators from Lady of the Sea General Hospital to talk about. Mostly, they talked about their IDA experience, and we do want to talk about that. But we haven't had a practicing doctor in the house yet to talk about COVID.
Yes.
So I would love to hear, especially in the early days of COVID, like April 2020,
Right.
and in those first few months. Can you talk about what life was like for you, what work life was like, and just any interesting stories from that time
Yeah,
frame?
sure. So, I had my first child, Georgia Grace. My husband and I had been married 12 years, and we waited for this, quote, perfect time to have a kid towards the end
Of
of
course.
residency. And we had her 3 weeks before the pandemic. So the very first few weeks of COVID, when, medical professionals were hit with this strange thing, I was actually home with a new baby. So I came back when my little girl was 3 weeks old into COVID, like peak COVID in April. And it was terrifying. Like as a young mom, you don't really know what to expect, but you have this innate need to take care of this child. I was like the crazy person going around Lysoling everything, not eating anything that was cooked in a public place because you just didn't know. But it really was an experience that all of us in healthcare will certainly not forget. In the beginning, people were not able to be with their loved ones when they were sick and dying. I think that was one of the hardest things that I recall. Just being with people, holding their hand, or even sometimes utilizing our phones to FaceTime family members on the outside as they were very sick and sometimes dying. That was hard. What I do is people that suffer brain trauma, car accidents, strokes. I mean, these are pretty significant things, and their family can't be with them in those moments. That was tough. So that was one of the hardest things. But on a positive end, one of the most amazing things was watching people really work together as a team to figure out things, to be supportive to another, to just, be humans and show love and compassion and dedication for community and for people. And that was really the positive, but it was tough. A lot of long days, long nights. The pathology we see in medicine post-COVID is different. We see strange strokes in the young and strange bleeds, and we also see a lot of inflammatory changes in people's spinal cords and things. So there were some new things that we really just weren't seeing a lot of before COVID that the COVID brought. So it was definitely challenging and still continues to be, even though it comes up and down and we have a lot more experience of how to handle it. It's certainly something that still poses a challenge.
It seems like, COVID definitely had its share of negatives, but like you said, it had its share of positives. Much like the hurricane, I think people came out of it now that we're finally walking around without our mask on, that we see some of the good. I mean, this organization, bless your heart, really began and came to prominence out of COVID and was sort of born out of COVID. But look, in what I do professionally, even to this day, when asked about it, looking back on what we could have done differently, the one thing I always point out that I wasn't prepared for, and look, I've been doing my job for now, 16 plus years, but I wasn't prepared for the outright rejection of facts and information and science that I saw during COVID and still to this day. And people that I'm normally on the same side of the fence with on every other issue, we didn't see eye to eye on this one. And it was, everything's a conspiracy and everybody, the government's out to get us. And I guess my question to you is, being a neurosurgeon, you may not have had the same experience as maybe a family doctor, but did you have any kind of experience with that with
Oh,
your patients?
yes. And it's more not for my patients. It was really more social media, like getting on
Right.
Facebook and watching the wars go down between people and people just downright jumping on other people's posts to share their, I'm going to say opinions, because it's really ultimately what most of it was really a stark contrast to what we had in early COVID, where people were really together and unified and supportive of healthcare workers and what they were going through. And part of that is emotional exhaustion. People were so sick of it. So when we had the, really right before the hurricane, the vaccine stuff became a real issue on Facebook. I almost just needed to take a break from Facebook because I found it to be really upsetting. But the reason is, I think everybody wants the same thing, right? We want COVID to be gone. We want to be healthy, and people just, are all facing the stressful time in different ways. But yeah, so in science and in healthcare, we can't just do what we want to do with patients. It's really called the standard of care. We practice medicine in what's called the standard of care. So whether it be what antibiotic, how long, what surgical treatment, what level of the spine, we have indications and we have treatments, and these things are proven in the literature with the scientific method. Basically, things are proven, and that's what we do. And so when people kind of bring a lot of non-science or poor science into scientific discussions, I think the scientists and all of us get a little frustrated because we know the methods, but the general public doesn't understand that. And so we try to be a little supportive but not pushy in helping people understand what the real facts are. I think if you have good healthcare providers that you trust, you don't have to take someone's word for their word, but allow them to guide and support you, because at the end of the day, it is a new disease and a new vaccine, and we're trying to figure all that out. But we do have science and we do have data, and if you talk to someone you trust, you'll get, I think, some informed decisions.
It seemed like everyone did that up until 2020.
Right.
Everyone trusted their doctor, and then all of a sudden there was questions. But okay, well, let's move on. I know that's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but let's move on to some positive news. So in March of this year, you were honored with a Woman of Achievement Award by your alma mater, Nicholls State, for your involvement in the community. So I want to talk about the involvement specifically, but let's first talk about what it means to be honored by your alma mater.
I was shocked. That's number one. I was truly never expecting something like that. It makes me emotional because I love this bayou so much. Everything I do, at work, at home, comes from a place of love. Everything I do for the community comes from a place of love. So to have people recognize that, not recognizing me for some test score or something like that, but for what really matters, which is, how I treat others and what my values are, certainly means a lot, and I hope that young people, because this was held at the university, see that things like that and actions like that can really have a lot of value in your personal life. But yeah, it meant so much, and I love Nicholls, and for them to honor me in that way was it was wonderful.
So let's talk about the reason you were recognized, as you said, your involvement in the community. I want to touch on your efforts following Hurricane Ida, but I want to first talk about your other endeavors, including your work with New Orleans Missions. Sure.
So, in New Orleans, my husband and I lived in the French Quarter. We actually lived kind of on the borderline Treme area, and our neighborhood was definitely afflicted with a lot of things: addiction, poverty, homelessness. And so, you do what you can. In medical school, we had some homeless clinics where we provide medical care. So that was one way we tried to give back to the community. And then my husband also likes to do stuff like that, so he helped as well with the New Orleans Mission. We even had my mom, my dad, my sister out there one Christmas Day serving dinner. But the New Orleans Mission is just basically for our homeless population and people in need to help keep their bellies fed and have a safe place that they can go and get some good nutrition. And so you cook and you serve and you get food donated, and it really feeds the soul. So we ended up making that almost like a little tradition in our family on Christmas to kind of remind ourselves of the spirit of the holidays.
That's awesome. Let's talk about your Hurricane Ida experience and the endeavor that came from that. But let's rewind let's talk about your actual experience during the hurricane. But you had just moved to Thibodeau Regional right before that,
I
correct?
started practice on August 1st. I had done one surgery. I think I was really just gearing up when the storm came through. And I was not on call for the week of the storm. It was one of those things like the Friday before the storm, I'm getting my hair done. Life was great. I thought it was a normal day. It was a category 2. And then all of a sudden, panic mode. So we have 2 young babies. I was not on call. So I did what I think most mom of young children would do. And I left. I went to family in Lafayette with our parents, our children. We left our puppies. Terrified, didn't know what we would come home to. Like most people, I think most people listening understand that feeling. Thankfully, our home is okay. We suffered a lot of damage, like most people, but, we had a home to come home to. So my husband came home the very next morning to secure things, but I came home because of the kids. We had to wait for generators. We came home day 3. We had no power for, I think, 29 days, but I needed to be there so I can support the hospital because the other 4 hospitals got shut down, so we were really busy. So I came home ASAP and was there to help in any way that I can. Most of the stuff we were seeing were traumatic. A lot of people, unfortunately, suffering injuries falling from their roof, some linemen from the buckets, things like that. But then, in times of stress, people have strokes and people have bleeds and people have things like that. So it was a busy time. Honestly, it reminded me of COVID. It was kind of a strange, only emergencies situation. So I felt like COVID in some ways prepared me for Ida, if that makes sense. But nonetheless, you want to do what you can to help. And I had a lot of downtime. My clinic was shut down for a couple of weeks, first couple of weeks. We were only doing emergency surgeries. So I had some downtime. So I started saying, well, I don't know where to give my money. And this was kind of right at the same time Bless Your Heart was really growing. They really hadn't gotten there at the same time I was getting there. So I independently started a GoFundMe. I said, I don't know where to give my money. I'm sure other people feel the same way, but I would hope that they would know that I would not steal their money if they gave it to me. I have, a good job. I don't need to take anyone else's money. So maybe if I put my own GoFundMe, people will give it to me and I'll make sure it gets in the proper hands. So that's kind of how it started, just out of desire to help my community. We were able to raise $40,000, and it wasn't certainly just my efforts. It was community effort. I worked with the Department of Delta Zeta at Nicholls State and SAE because these are good friends of mine, and we knew how to raise money in college to throw parties. We knew how to throw Crawfish Day, so I figured we can raise some money together and work together. So as it started to gain traction and gain more money, we called Jeray and we said, Jeray, you guys are doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing. Let's all work together and try to really help our community in a more impactful way. So we were thankful to work with Bless Your Heart. It was amazing. That's how I met Hillary and some of the folks, and we're friends to this day from that. But yeah, so we were able to raise $40,000. We did 2 big events where we did both meals and gift cards to Rouse's, just to try to help people know that we care and we're here to help, and in some small way they can buy whatever they need, whether it be cleaning supplies, food, whatever.
I don't know if frustration is the right word, but one thing that a lot of people from the South Lafourche area talked about as they ventured their way toward Thibodeau in the months of October and November, they said it felt like life was back to normal for people in the northern part of the parish, where people were still suffering. Some were still homeless in the southern part of the parish. As someone who, lives and works further north than most of the people that of our listening audience, of our primary listening audience in the South Lafourche area, but you were kind of part of that effort, and that's what a lot of people talked about is, yeah, that's true, but we saw the unification of Lafourche a lot during the storm because people from the northern area were able to come down. A lot of businesses from the Thibodeau area, a lot of people like yourself coming down and feeding the crowd. So talk about that experience from that perspective, from the other side, from the northern side, up the bayou perspective, as you will, of being able to help your neighbors in the southern area.
I mean, there's no question that Ida was much more devastating down here than it was in Thibodeau. No question. My parents in Lockport had a fair amount of damage as well. Their house is in some, it has a lot of issues. So I do understand personally what it's like, but I'm not in your shoes, and I fully recognize that it was much more devastating here. But I think that we had an opportunity, people from Thibodaux who didn't have to be in our own yards and attics working, to try to give our time elsewhere. You know, when we did the first Feed and Fun Lafourche in Lockport, that one, you know, I was able to get, I kid you not, about 170 volunteers from Thibodaux. It was a ridiculous amount of people there because they wanted to be. They had no incentive other than they wanted to be. And this was a mix of retired people all the way down to college kids. And even some families brought their young children. And so there's absolute unity, even if you didn't maybe see it or feel it. Know that people all throughout Bayou Lafourche were, you know, certainly praying and hoping to support our parish, especially those in the lower parts of the parish, however we can.
All right. Well, it's time for our rapid fire question round. So the way this works is you can give us a one-word answer, or you can expand on an answer if you feel you need to explain, which a lot of people do. So it's up to you. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What's your go-to order at a down the bayou restaurant?
Well, now that I live in Thibodaux, I guess Lockport is considered down the bayou. So I'm going to go with Beck's Steak Night on Monday night.
That's fair. All right. What's your favorite Cajun word or phrase and its meaning?
I like to say croissants. I don't know why. Every time my child needs her diaper changed, or I just want to make fun of my husband, that word seems to be one I love to throw out there.
My 4-year-old son loves saying that word too, as well.
Also, pichnik. I have a young woman from France that lives in our home, and I'm always like, is this a real French word, or is this like Cajun French? And so the other day, my husband like pichnicked me, and he was like, I was like, why did you pichnick me? And he was like, I don't know. And then we asked her. Apparently, that's not a real French word. I guess that's true Cajun.
We're learning, because we do, you know, our producer Ross does a lot of the DTB isms on our social media, and we're learning that a lot of our Cajun words do have, you know, their roots in French. But some of them, we have no idea where they come from. We just totally made them up.
Over a game of Pedro. Yeah,
exactly. Your favorite Snowball flavor?
I like coconut.
Coconut has been hands down the most.
Coconut's my favorite.
The most repeated answer we've gotten.
I'm going to throw one other one out there. I don't really like a whole lot of sweet things. So when I was a little kid, I used to get pickle juice over ice. But Brooks in Thibodaux, and I think there's one in Homa, they actually have a pickle Snowball with a spear in it. So that one is probably my go-to.
Yeah, that's not for me. I probably already know the answer for this, and it probably depends on work, but next hurricane, staying or evacuating?
It depends on work, you know, but I have young babies, and I am not a gambler in life. I like to play it safe. So if it's over Category 2, my children are leaving with or without me, but if I'm on call, I'm going to stay here.
All right, and this is the last one. This is a hot topic right now locally. Jambalaya or pastalaya?
Pastalaya.
There you go.
Pastalaya.
All right. She is medically_blonde on Instagram, Dr. Lindsay Lasseigne. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That'll do it for this episode of the DTB Podcast. Thanks to our producer, Ross Jamba, our executive producers, Jure Gyro and Hillary Crum, and the rest of the Bless Your Heart nonprofit board members, Luke Newman and Chris Brantley. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the DTB Podcast on Facebook, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also get more content by following us on Twitter and TikTok at the DTB Podcast. I'm Brennan Mathern. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.